Letters from the Lighthouse. Chapter 1. Light in Solitude. Anna Solberg lived on a small rocky island in the Lofoten archipelago, far from the noise of cities and the comfort of crowds. Her home was a modest wooden house beside the tall lighthouse she cared for. The lighthouse stood like a quiet guardian, its light sweeping across the cold sea every night. Anna was 31 years old, strong in body and calm in spirit. She had been the keeper of this lighthouse for 5 years. Her job was simple but important. She kept the flame burning, cleaned the lenses, recorded the weather, and sent reports to the mainland once a week. She checked the machinery, watched the tides, and made sure the light never failed. Ships depended on it. Lives depended on it. And she took that responsibility seriously. Her days followed a quiet rhythm. She woke early, boiled water for coffee, and stepped outside to feel the wind. She fed the birds that gathered near her porch and sometimes spoke to them softly, though they never answered. She wrote in her logbook, fixed small things around the house, and read old books by the fire. Her nights were longer. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and the sea roared in the distance. She often sat by the window, watching the beam of light move across the waves. It was the only movement in the darkness. It reminded her that she was not completely alone. Anna had grown used to solitude. She had chosen this life after losing someone close, and the silence helped her heal. But sometimes, the silence felt too deep. It was not just the absence of voices. It was the absence of being seen, of being known. She did not speak to anyone for days. The supply boat came once a week, but the crew stayed only a few minutes. They dropped off food, collected her reports, and left. She watched them go, then returned to her quiet world. She did not complain. She did not cry. But inside, her heart sometimes felt like a locked room with no key. One morning, as she sorted through the mailbag left by the boat, she found something unexpected. It was a letter, addressed to her by name, written in neat handwriting. She opened it slowly, unsure who would write to her. The letter came from another lighthouse keeper on a nearby island. His name was Elias Mortensen. He was 38, and he had been working alone for many years. His words were simple, but they carried warmth. He wrote about the wind that never rested, the sea that changed every hour, and the quiet that filled his days. He said he had heard of her through the supply crew and wanted to write, just to share a few thoughts. Anna read the letter twice. Then a third time. It was not long, but it stayed with her. She placed it on her desk and looked at it for hours. She felt something stir inside her, something gentle and unfamiliar. It was not excitement. It was not fear. It was a kind of comfort. Someone had reached out. Someone who understood the silence. Someone who lived with the same wind, the same sea, the same long nights. She did not know him, but she felt close to him in a way she could not explain. That evening, as the lighthouse beam turned slowly across the water, Anna sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper. She held her pen for a long time before writing. She did not know what to say. But she knew she wanted to answer. She wanted to tell him about the birds, about the way the light looked in the fog, about the small things that filled her days. She wanted to share something, even if it was only a few words. She began to write, slowly and carefully, letting her thoughts flow like the tide. The letter was short, but honest. She folded it, placed it in an envelope, and set it aside for the next boat. As she did, she felt a quiet warmth in her chest. It was not loud. It was not bright. But it was real. The lighthouse still shone outside, steady and strong. And inside, something else had begun to shine too. A small light. A quiet hope. A beginning. Chapter 2. The Reply. Anna Solberg sat at her desk with the letter from Elias resting beside her notebook. The paper had already softened at the edges from her hands. She had read it many times, each word becoming more familiar, more personal. She didn't know why he had written to her. They had never met, never spoken. But something in his words felt honest and kind. He had written about the wind and the sea, about the silence that filled his days. He had not asked for anything. He had simply shared a piece of his world. And that small gesture had touched something inside her. For several days, Anna thought about how to reply. She didn't want to sound too formal or too distant. She didn't want to ask questions she wasn't ready to hear answers to. She wanted to write something real, something that showed who she was. So she began with the birds. Every morning, small seabirds gathered near her window. They pecked at crumbs she left on the sill and sometimes tapped the glass with their beaks. She wrote about how she watched them while drinking coffee, how their presence made the mornings feel less empty. She described the way the light moved through the fog, how the sea changed color with the sky, how the lighthouse beam looked like a slow heartbeat in the dark. Her words were simple, but they came from a quiet place inside her. She didn't write about her past. Not yet. She wrote about her days, about the rhythm of her life, about the small things that gave her comfort. She signed the letter with care and placed it in an envelope. When the weekly boat arrived, she handed it to the crew without saying much. Then she waited. The reply came faster than she expected. A few days later, another envelope arrived, addressed in the same neat handwriting. Elias had written again. He thanked her for her letter and said the birds sounded lovely. He wrote about the seals that sometimes rested near his lighthouse, about the way the waves carved patterns into the rocks. He said her words had made him smile. He said it was good to know someone else was out there, watching the same sea, feeling the same silence. Their exchange continued. Each week, a new letter arrived. They wrote about the weather, about the stars, about the sound of the wind through the cracks in the walls. They described their routines, their small joys, their quiet thoughts. They never spoke of loneliness directly, but it was there, between the lines. And slowly, something began to grow. Not loud or sudden, but steady and warm. A kind of trust. A kind of connection. Anna found herself looking forward to each letter. She began to write more freely, sharing small memories, small hopes. She didn't feel the need to impress or hide. Elias wrote with the same honesty. His words were gentle, thoughtful, sometimes poetic. He didn't try to be clever. He simply wrote what he felt. And Anna felt seen. Not as a lighthouse keeper, not as a name on a report, but as a person. The letters became part of her life. She placed them in a wooden box, tied with a ribbon. She read them on quiet evenings, letting the words fill the room like soft light. She didn't know where this exchange would lead. She didn't expect anything. But she felt less alone. She felt that someone, somewhere, was thinking of her. And that thought was enough to make the silence feel less heavy. In the stillness of her island, surrounded by sea and sky, Anna had found a voice that reached her. Not through sound, but through paper and ink. And in that voice, she found warmth. She found hope. She found the beginning of something that didn't need to be named. It was enough that it was there. Chapter 3. The Storm. The wind began as a whisper, soft and cold, brushing against the windows of Anna's small house. She noticed the change in the air before the sky turned dark. The sea, usually calm in the early morning, grew restless. Waves rose higher, crashing against the rocks with growing force. The birds that usually gathered near her porch disappeared. The clouds thickened, and the light from the lighthouse seemed weaker, swallowed by the coming storm. Anna knew what was coming. She had seen storms before, but this one felt different. It was stronger, louder, and more sudden. She checked the lantern, tightened the shutters, and prepared for a long night. By afternoon, the storm had fully arrived. The wind howled like a wild animal, shaking the walls and rattling the roof. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, flooding the paths and soaking the ground. The lighthouse groaned under the pressure, its metal frame trembling with each gust. Anna stayed inside, watching the sea through the small window. The waves were enormous, crashing into the cliffs and spraying water high into the air. She thought of Elias. His island was even more exposed than hers. She imagined his lighthouse standing against the storm, alone and silent. She wondered if he was safe, if he had managed to keep the light burning. She had written a letter the day before, a quiet note about the changing seasons and the birds returning. But now, the boat would not come. No one would sail in this weather. Her letter sat on the table, waiting, but she knew it would not leave the island for days. She felt helpless. The storm was not just outside. It was inside her too. She worried about Elias more than she expected. His words had become part of her days, part of her thoughts. She missed them. She missed him. The storm lasted for 3 days. During that time, Anna barely slept. She checked the lighthouse every few hours, making sure the flame stayed strong. She boiled water, made simple meals, and listened to the wind. The silence between letters felt heavier than ever. When the storm finally passed, the sea was calm again, but the sky remained gray. The boat did not come for another week. When it finally arrived, Anna rushed to meet it. She handed over her letter, now rewritten with more emotion. She had added new words, not just about the weather, but about her fear. She told Elias she had worried for him, that she had thought of him every day. She didn't hide her feelings. She let them flow, like the rain that had washed over her island. But when the mailbag was opened, there was no letter from Elias. Anna felt her chest tighten. She tried not to panic, but the silence was too long. She returned to her house and waited. She wrote again, another letter filled with quiet hope and concern. She placed it in the next mailbag and watched the boat disappear into the horizon. Days passed. Then a week. Finally, a reply came. The envelope was damp from the sea air, but the handwriting was clear. Elias was alive. His lighthouse had been damaged, and he had spent days repairing it. The storm had broken windows, flooded the lower rooms, and nearly taken the light. But he had stayed. He had fought to keep the flame burning. And through it all, he had thought of Anna. He wrote that her letters had been his guide, his comfort, his light in the darkness. He said that even when the sea roared and the wind screamed, he had held onto her words. They had reminded him that someone was out there, someone who cared. Anna read the letter slowly, letting each word settle into her heart. She felt relief, but also something deeper. She understood now that their connection was not just about sharing thoughts. It was about surviving together, even from afar. Her words had reached him through the storm. And his reply had reached her through silence. The sea had tested them, but their letters had held strong. She placed the new letter in her box, tied it with the others, and sat by the window. The lighthouse beam turned slowly, steady and bright. Outside, the sea was calm again. But inside, something had changed. The storm had passed, but the feeling remained. A quiet bond. A shared strength. A light that did not fade. Chapter 4. The Secret. Anna Solberg sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper in front of her. The sea outside was calm, and the lighthouse beam moved slowly across the waves. She had received Elias's last letter 3 days ago, and she had read it many times. His words were gentle and thoughtful, as always, but there was something in them that made her pause. She felt a quiet warmth when she read his lines, a feeling that stayed with her even after the letter was folded and placed in her wooden box. She had started to notice how often she thought of him, not just when writing, but during her walks, her meals, and even in her dreams. She realized that her feelings had grown deeper. She cared for him, more than she had expected, more than she had allowed herself to feel in years. But she didn't know if Elias felt the same. His letters were kind, but careful. He never spoke of love or longing. He wrote about the sea, the sky, and the silence. He wrote about small things, like the way the light hit the rocks or how the seals played near his lighthouse. Anna didn't want to assume anything. She didn't want to ruin what they had built with words. But she also didn't want to hide anymore. She decided to share something real, something she had never written before. She began her letter slowly. She wrote about her brother, Johan, who had died 5 years earlier in a fishing accident. He had been her closest friend, her protector, the one who made her laugh when the world felt heavy. His death had broken something inside her. She had left the mainland soon after, looking for a place where she could be alone, where she could breathe without reminders. The lighthouse had become her shelter, her quiet place. She had never told anyone why she came to the island. But now, she told Elias. She didn't write with drama. She wrote with honesty. She described the pain, the silence, and the slow healing. She told him how the sea had helped her, how the light from the tower had given her a sense of purpose. She wrote that his letters had brought something back to her, something she thought she had lost. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't expect a reply filled with emotion. She just wanted him to know. When the boat came, she handed the letter to the crew with a quiet nod. Then she waited. The days passed slowly. She watched the horizon, hoping for a reply. When it finally arrived, she held the envelope in her hands for a long time before opening it. Elias had written back with care. He thanked her for her words and said he was honored that she had shared her story. Then he shared his own. He wrote about his wife, Ingrid, who had died many years ago from illness. They had lived together on the island where he now kept the lighthouse. She had loved the sea, the birds, and the quiet. Her death had left him alone, but he had stayed, keeping the light burning in her memory. He had never spoken of her to anyone. But now, he told Anna. His words were soft, full of sorrow and peace. He said that her letters had reminded him of what it felt like to be close to someone again. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. After that, their letters changed. They became quieter, but stronger. They didn't write every detail, but the meaning was clear. They were no longer just lighthouse keepers. They were two people who had carried pain, who had chosen silence, and who had found each other through words. Their letters were not just messages. They were bridges. They were lights in the dark. They were proof that even in the loneliest places, connection could grow. Anna placed Elias's letter in her box and tied the ribbon again. She sat by the window and watched the sea. The lighthouse beam moved slowly, steady and bright. She felt something inside her shift. It was not loud. It was not sudden. But it was real. She had shared her secret. He had shared his. And now, they were no longer strangers. They were something more. Something quiet. Something true. Chapter 5. The Invitation. Spring came slowly to the islands. The snow melted and the wind grew softer. The sea, once wild and cold, began to calm. Anna Solberg noticed the change in the air. The birds returned to her window, and the sky stayed light longer each evening. She felt the season inside her too, like something waking up after a long sleep. Then one morning, she received a letter from Elias. His words were gentle, but they carried something new. He wrote that he wanted to see her. He asked if he could visit her island when the sea was calm enough to travel. He said he had thought about it for a long time and hoped she would not mind. Anna read the letter again and again. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with something close to it. She had grown used to their letters, to the quiet rhythm of words sent across the water. Their connection had grown slowly, like a plant in winter light. She had shared her story, and he had shared his. They had built something strong, but fragile. Now he wanted to step into her world, not just with ink and paper, but with footsteps and voice. She didn't know what to say. She feared that reality might be different from the feeling they had created. She worried that meeting face to face might change everything. But deep inside, she also wanted to see him. She wanted to know the sound of his voice, the way he moved, the look in his eyes. She wanted to sit across from him, not just imagine him. So she wrote back with simple words, "I will wait." She placed the letter in the mailbag and watched the boat disappear into the horizon. Then she began to prepare. Her house was small but warm. She cleaned each room, dusted the shelves, and opened the windows to let in the spring air. She baked bread, the kind her mother used to make, with herbs and sea salt. She placed wildflowers in a jar on the table. She checked the path from the dock to her door, making sure it was clear. She didn't know when he would come, but she wanted everything to feel welcoming. She didn't decorate with bright colors or grand gestures. She kept things simple, honest, like her letters. Each morning, she walked to the edge of the island and looked out at the sea. She watched for a boat, for a figure, for a sign. The days passed slowly. She continued her lighthouse duties, but her thoughts were full of Elias. She imagined him packing his bag, stepping onto the boat, watching the waves. She wondered what he would bring, what he would say. She didn't expect romance or promises. She only hoped for truth, for presence, for something real. The sea stayed calm, and the sky stayed clear. Anna waited with quiet hope. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't speak of it to the crew or write about it in her logbook. It was her secret, her moment. She knew that even if he didn't come, the invitation had already changed something inside her. It had opened a door she had kept closed for years. It had reminded her that connection could grow beyond words, beyond distance. It had reminded her that waiting could be an act of courage. She stood by the window each evening, watching the light from the lighthouse stretch across the water. It was steady, like her heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she had said yes. She had chosen to wait. And in that choice, she had already moved closer to something new. Something quiet. Something true. Chapter 6. The Absence. The days passed slowly after Anna sent her last letter. The sea remained calm, and the sky stayed clear. Each morning, she walked to the edge of the island and looked out across the water. She watched for a boat, for a figure, for a sign that Elias was coming. She had prepared everything. The house was clean, the bread was fresh, and the flowers on the table had been replaced more than once. She kept the kettle ready and the extra chair near the window. She imagined how it would feel to hear his footsteps on the wooden floor, to see him standing in the doorway, to speak without paper between them. But the boat did not bring him. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The supply boat came as usual, but Elias was not on it. Anna tried not to show her disappointment. She greeted the crew, accepted the mail, and returned to her house. Inside the mailbag was a letter. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The letter was short. Elias wrote that he could not come. His health had worsened. He had hoped to feel stronger, but his body had not allowed it. He asked for forgiveness. He said he did not want her to see him weak. He thanked her for waiting, for preparing, for believing. He ended the letter with a quiet wish for peace. Anna sat by the window with the letter in her hands. The light from the lighthouse moved slowly across the sea. She did not cry. Her face was calm, but her heart felt heavy. She had not expected a perfect meeting. She had not imagined a storybook ending. But she had hoped. She had waited with care, with courage, with quiet joy. And now, that hope had changed. It had not disappeared, but it had shifted into something softer, something sadder. She understood his choice. She respected it. But it still hurt. She placed the letter in the wooden box with the others. She tied the ribbon gently and returned it to the shelf. Then she made tea and sat in silence. The house felt different now. Not empty, but still. The extra chair remained by the window, untouched. The flowers on the table began to wilt. She did not replace them. She let them fade slowly, like a season passing. She continued her work at the lighthouse. She cleaned the lenses, recorded the weather, and kept the flame burning. The light never failed. It moved across the sea each night, steady and strong. In the quiet hours, Anna thought about Elias. She thought about his words, his stories, his strength. She thought about the way he had shared his pain, his memories, his hope. She knew he had wanted to come. She knew he had tried. And that was enough. His absence was not a rejection. It was a truth. A part of life that could not be changed. She accepted it with grace, even as it left a space inside her. The lighthouse stood tall against the sky. Its light reached far into the dark, guiding ships through the night. Anna watched it from her window, the same way she had watched the sea. She knew that some things could not be touched, but they could still be felt. Elias was not there, but his presence remained. In the letters, in the silence, in the light. And that, in its own quiet way, was a kind of love. A love that did not need to be seen to be real. A love that stayed, even in absence. Chapter 7. The Last Letter. The days grew colder again, and the wind returned to the island with its usual strength. Anna Solberg continued her routine with quiet focus. She kept the lighthouse in perfect order, cleaned the lenses, and sent her reports to the mainland. But inside, something had changed. She no longer waited for Elias to arrive. She no longer watched the sea with hope. She had accepted his absence, though it had left a soft ache in her chest. She still read his letters, sometimes late at night, letting the words settle like snow. They were her comfort, her company, her light. One morning, as she sorted through the mailbag left by the supply boat, she found a letter that felt different. The envelope was thinner, and the handwriting looked slower, more fragile. She opened it carefully and sat down by the window. The letter was from Elias. It was his last. He wrote that he felt his time was ending. His body had grown weaker, and he knew he would not recover. He did not write with fear or sadness. His words were calm, full of peace. He thanked Anna for her light, her words, her presence. He said her letters had saved him, had given him something to hold on to when everything else felt lost. He asked her not to be sad, but to remember. He said that love could live in silence, and that her kindness had reached him in ways he never thought possible. Anna read the letter slowly, then again. She held it in her hands for a long time, letting the weight of his words settle in her heart. She did not cry. Her eyes were dry, but her chest felt full. She walked to the lighthouse and stood beside it, watching the sea. The waves moved gently, and the sky was pale. She thought of Elias, of his island, of the light he had kept burning for so many years. She imagined him sitting by his window, writing with slow hands, looking out at the same sea. That evening, Anna wrote a reply. She knew he would never read it, but she needed to write. She told him that she would remember. She would remember his stories, his strength, his quiet way of speaking through letters. She would remember the way he had made her feel seen, even from far away. She wrote that his light had reached her too, that it had helped her heal, helped her believe again. She folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box with all the others. She tied the ribbon gently and placed the box back on the shelf. The lighthouse continued to shine each night, steady and strong. Anna kept it burning with care, knowing that its light was more than a signal for ships. It was a symbol of something deeper. It was a reminder that connection could live across distance, across silence, across time. She no longer waited for letters, but she still felt Elias's presence. In the wind, in the sea, in the quiet moments between tasks. His words had become part of her world, part of her story. She walked the island with calm steps, tending to her duties, watching the horizon. She knew that love did not always need touch or voice. Sometimes it lived in letters. Sometimes it lived in memory. And sometimes it stayed, like the light of a lighthouse that guides even those who can no longer return. Elias was gone, but his echo remained. And Anna carried it with her, gently, like a flame that never faded. Moral. Sometimes love lives not in touch, but in words. It can pass through storms, loneliness, and time. And if it is true, it stays, like the light of a lighthouse that guides even those who can no longer return. Real feeling doesn't need a meeting. It finds its way through distance, through fear, through silence. And if it once warmed the heart, it will live there forever, like a quiet echo, like a letter that needs no reply. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.